What's up, guys? My name is Nick. Welcome back for my reading wrap up for the month of December. And just like in November, because I work in retail, specifically I work in a grocery store, the month of December was a little bit wild as far as work and my work schedule. So that made fitting, reading time and just in general having the desire to read books a little bit more challenging than it would have at any other point in the year. So my reading, progress and just the amount of books that I finished was, I suppose, a little bit less than I would normally be able to get done. But considering the fact that two of the books specifically that I read were, I personally would say, a little bit dense in terms of just the writing and just how, I guess, difficult it is to read the words on the pages. That kind of slowed my progress down a little bit. So I finished 4 books this month, which is not really bad. That's a one book per week, which is good, which is a decent enough pace, but I personally could probably do a little bit better. But it's not a competition to read the most number of books in imaginable or possible. So with all of that being said, let's get into the 4 books that I finished in the month of December. The first book that I finished this month was Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. Book 1 in the Farseer trilogy. And I know that this is not necessarily a book that is unknown to anybody, specifically, probably people who watch these videos, specifically people who like fantasy. If you like fantasy and stuff like that, you've probably read some Robin Hobb or all that kind of stuff. But I hadn't read this. I just, like I've said previously in other videos, I just recently got back into, reading like I had in the very distant past. And so I picked this up, read it, and it was amazing. I'm not really going to go into like a super or a like detailed, I guess, sort of breakdown or summary of kind of like the plot of this book. But just, I suppose the basic premise of this is we kind of follow our main character, whose name is Fitz, as he grows up and sort of finds his place in the world and the society that Robin Hobb has created. The challenge for that, of course, or the thing that makes it a little bit complex and difficult and throws all these kinds of curveballs into the story is the fact that Fitz is the bastard child of the heir to the throne or the kingdom or whatever that this sort of story takes place in. And so because he's the bastard child, he kind of gets pushed off to the fringes of the society, I suppose, or the royal court, I guess, because, the way things work are like bastard childs aren't necessarily like legitimate children, but in a pinch they can be made legitimate, for the purposes of like having an heir and other kind, royal bloodline kinds of things. And that's actually like just a historical thing, not necessarily in this book, but unless they're needed, bastard children are kind of just ignored and not exactly acknowledged or recognized as actually being like kids. And so Fitz is essentially sort of pushed off to the fringe and the place and that he can be most useful to the royal family, where he's not going to be noticeable or maybe cause so many problems by just, by the existence of being a bastard child, is that he is sort of trained to become the king's assassin, which is obviously a super secret kind of thing. Like, nobody can know that he necessarily exists. He's not supposed to get caught, and, he works in the shadows and secretly as an assassin. And this book kind of follows, or the story follows his sort of progression from being a kid, kind of training a little bit of, learning a little bit of how to sort of function his sort of place in the whole like royal family system and all that stuff. And then, of course, learning his abilities as an assassin, and then just, again, learning his own personal abilities outside of, his own personal abilities and talents outside of being an assassin. And all of that is very, very awesome. The universe and the characters and all this kind of stuff is fantastic. It's super in-depth and it's quite detailed, which is really good. There's a lot to kind of sink your teeth in this book. It's very, very, very good. I really enjoy Fitz as a character. It just is like, he's a kid trying to figure out what exactly is going on with his life and, what he's supposed to do and how he fits and what the proper course of action is in all of these sort of situations and scenarios. And every chapter in this book more or less is kind of a learning moment, across the course of his life, in, whether that's him being an assassin or other, things that he's doing, in his life. And it's a lot of fun. I really, really enjoy it. Fitz is cool. There's a wide variety of other characters that are going to, I think, be significant throughout the course of the series here, the other 2 books. And they are a very varied cast of characters in terms of like who they are, what their personalities are, and kind of like what their motivations for their interactions with the other characters in the world. And then on top of just the personal, like interpersonal relationship and conflicts and stuff that come up, there's also external factors, environmental things, political things, with the wider, world at large in this book that also play a factor too, that are also cool and interesting. And none of this stuff is necessarily resolved at the end of the book because, this is a trilogy and it was kind of, I presume at the time that it was written with the intent that there were going to be, books that follow and continue the story. So it's really, really, really good. Like as a first book in a series, I suppose this would be like the intro sort of thing to lay the groundwork for the rest of the series. And created a world of rich characters and just a super in-depth sort of just physical, I suppose, setting for the story that is really, really great. There's a lot to sink your teeth into. There's a lot to kind of break down and get into and digest. And for that, I loved it. And that made this a little bit of a slog to read at times because there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of description. There's a lot of people and characterizations of those people and the places and the events that are happening and discussion about that and, stuff like that. And there's a lot to think about. So that made this not the quickest read in the world, but it wasn't necessarily hard either. But just all in all, a really good, meaty, semi-challenging sort of book to read. For all of those reasons that I just discussed, I gave this book a 5 out of 5. The second book that I finished this month was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I prepped to read this book. I guess I didn't really prep, but I read some V.E. Schwab the previous month, kind of in anticipation of reading this book. And I'm not necessarily glad that I did because it doesn't really make any difference, but overall, this is a fantastic book. This book is probably my favorite book that I have read this year. And just, I don't even know the words to really describe this book and the effect that it had on me personally as a reader. And we'll kind of get to that a little bit, but there's just a super simple breakdown of this because I don't want to give too much away since this book is a new release. You may not have read it, but this does follow, of course, Addie LaRue, our main character, she's basically kind of cursed to live her life, but never ever be remembered by the people that she crosses. So as soon as she is like out of their eyesight, they completely forget that she exists. And so she just lives her life, moment by moment, not able to actually leave any kind of mark on the world in which she exists. So she can experience history and all these crazy things, but she can't write anything down. She cannot change the world around her in any way because if she breaks something, she breaks it, but then of course it immediately mends itself back together and is whole once again. So it's as if she never actually existed in that place. And so this story sort of goes through, you flip between present day, or I should say 2016, I think, the year 2016, and, various points in her past. And you really kind of, the sort of the repetition, I suppose, where there is a repetition in this sort of like, I guess to reinforce the idea that, everything that she's experiencing in present day or throughout the entirety of her lifetime, she's experienced it before, she's going to experience it again. And every single time when she like meets somebody or has her like, one day, love affair or fall in love with the person, all that kind of stuff, that she's going to fall in love with people, they're going to forget her, and she's going to do it again and again and again and again. And it's not gonna suck, and it's gonna always suck. It's gonna be bad every single time. Just the fact that she can't have an impact on anybody in any meaningful way, or actually in any way at all, just sucks. And the writing and the flip-flopping between present day to past, and kind of seeing like this stuff that's happening in the present day right now, this also happened, however long in the past, and she's experienced that once again. It reminds her of this day with this guy or this person and this event. And, just it kind of, you get a real sense of sort of feel and I guess hurt and sadness through the fact that, she's just going through her life as a ghost, and she can't really leave an impact on anything. The only thing that she really can do that leaves her mark really is sort of influence people to create other things. So, there's a moment in this book, or there's moments throughout this entire, I think that all of these, there's things that come up in this book, art specifically, where she's influenced people that she's come in contact with over the course of her lifetime to create art, whether that's like a painting or a sculpture or a drawing or a piece of music or something like that. Like, she had an impact in sort of planting the seed for that to be created. But she personally cannot create anything like that, which is sad. And all of that, right? Basically just the entire sort of book here, building up the amount of, pain and anguish and disappointment in this book, builds up to the end of the story, which is heartbreaking. It is, I guess, devastating. Legitimately, the end of this book, almost made me cry. I was like that close. I was gonna cry. There were gonna be tears coming out of my eyes, to be completely honest, because by the end of it, you just want just one moment that you think is gonna happen where she could actually personally leave a mark on the world in one way or another, whether that's leaving an actual memory, a tangible memory for somebody to, remember her by, or something that she personally was able to actually physically manifest into the world and stuff. And you want it to happen. And if it does or doesn't, the way that this all turns out, is really, really emotionally, it's just really emotional one way or the other. And that's really, really good. So this book is super, super moving. It's absolutely fantastic. And just all of the writing of this book leading up to the conclusion and the finale is phenomenal. It just makes it super, super impactful. So for that reason, give this book a 5 out of 5. I definitely recommend, if you haven't read this yet, definitely pick it up as soon as you possibly can and then read it. The third book that I finished this month is called 16th Watch by Myke Cole. We started off this month with 2 fantastic, phenomenal 5-star books, but those are the only 2 5-star books. The other 2 books that I finished this month are decidedly average to poor. Spoiler alert. But let's talk about this book first, because that's what I'm holding up. And this is a decent book. I'm not gonna lie. It's definitely not horrible. It's not my favorite book that I've ever read in my lifetime, but it definitely is not bad. I'm not going to go into like the whole plot and the stuff that's going on in this book, because to be honest, it's kind of silly. You need to just sort of just suspend your belief, I suppose, in like the plausibility of what exactly is going on, or I should say the main, motivation or the main storyline in this book. But just keep in mind, right, this is like spaceships in space, Coast Guard, Navy, doing Coast Guard and Navy things, which is fun. It's great. It's a military kind of thing. You get the military vibes. I'm just going to say it's kind of reminding me maybe reading some Tom Clancy, because, he's like, one of the most popular military fiction writers out there. And this kind of has, vibes of that, I suppose, of being something that is definitely based in as much reality of like the military as it possibly can be, while also being, spaceships in outer space on the moon, which is fun. It's cool. And so this book is definitely I believe our author in this book, Myke Cole, he's actually got military experience, and I think that really does shine through with all of the military writing. So your military characters, they carry themselves and they, they've kind of got, the military kind of attitude, I suppose, that you would imagine that they might have. Maybe it's a stereotypical military attitude, which is cool. So the military aspect of it is awesome. The action is very, very awesome. It's very fun. It's very, I don't know about necessarily realistic, but it definitely does have the vibes of this is plausible, when you're thinking about the Coast Guard, catching people and saving people's lives on the moon, like the Coast Guard does on planet Earth, in the oceans, in the lakes and the rivers of the United States. It's a very interesting kind of thing. The downside to this that I don't really, like, is that instead of being like a pure military thriller, action-packed explosions and guns kind of book, there's also like emotional, like family things and stuff like that in this, which isn't bad, but it kind of dilutes the sort of like the balls to the wall action that is in this when it comes to like the military and the battles and all that kind of stuff that happens in this. The interludes for like, weepy, tear-jerking moments in this book, but our main character's personal issues and stuff like that come out is cool. It's not like there's no place for these in this kind of story, or that it's not a thing that shouldn't be included, but just the combination of the two, they didn't really mesh particularly well. And so instead of being good and excellent in one way, it was pretty just kind of average in two different ways. Maybe if this book was a little bit longer and the author had some more time to or spent more time fleshing this out, if it was maybe twice as long, then it would have been much more enjoyable, and it would have had more depth to it. But as it is, the action and the shooting and the explosions is, really not particularly deep, obviously, because it's just like your classic, I guess, shooter thriller movie sort of thing. I guess if you were going to put it into movie terms, and then you add like the personal development, character, emotional kind of stuff that kind of drags that down and sort of dilutes it. And the personal character development isn't really particularly compelling or interesting, unfortunately. So, for that being a, enjoyable, I would say average read that is kind of dragged down a little bit by the personal sob story kind of stuff that's in this, I personally give this book a 2, where I rated this book 2 stars out of 5. We're going to wrap this video up with the final book that I read, which is Universal Harvester by John Darniel, I believe is how you would say that last name. And I'm just going to come out and say that I think that this book kind of sucked, like a lot. Now, the whole premise of this book of a kid in the middle of nowhere town, in Iowa, who works at a video rental store, where videotapes get returned with creepy, weird scenes that are being cut into them. And he has to go and or he is compelled, sort of, in a way, to go and investigate and find out what exactly is going on, where these are coming from, what the backstory is behind that, and all that stuff, is compelling, because the videotape footage that, is described in this book is very, definitely very creepy, and has the potential to lead to some very scary and spooky areas. But just the unfortunate thing is that you explore all of these paths, and there's all these questions that get asked throughout the story that get explored. But by the end of the story, there's basically no actual conclusion to any of it. So I was really kind of left with I guess technically a book that doesn't have an ending isn't very, I don't know if you would say that's good or bad. On one hand, I think that the open-endedness is good, because it kind of gives your mind the ability to fill in the blanks, potentially, if that's what you want to do, which could be spooky in and of itself, because you can think of some very creepy and crazy things to have happened that aren't explicitly described in this book, and and stuff. But I couldn't really think of anything, and obviously I was just reading the book to find out what exactly the author intended us to sort of think and find out about this book, but nothing is actually revealed in the end of this book. So you don't find out what the reason for the video clips that sort of spur this whole story on. You don't find out where they came from. You don't necessarily find out, well, you do find out who made them, kind of, sort of, a little bit, not really though, although it's not a very concrete answer in any kind of way. You don't find out who the people in the videos even are. You don't find out what happened to those people. You don't find out any of the questions surrounding the why or anything like that. So all of this stuff happens that just has massive potential to be something that leads to a super scary and super creepy kind of place, but none of it actually gets delivered on. So there's potential for this book that I think was just kind of left on the table, unfortunately, because I mean, I read it. It was compelling all the way through because I wanted to just find out like what exactly is the deal with these videos and these tapes and what is going on here, right? Because this creepy thing that is the basis for this entire story and all of these pages and all of this writing. But then it just didn't, I finished the book and there was no answer. And so ultimately I was disappointed. And, you know, for a book that doesn't actually deliver in any explicit way, like it doesn't necessarily have to be like good even. It doesn't have to be a good conclusion or a good ending or even anything that's fulfilling, but just to not necessarily provide anything, in my opinion, was super, super disappointing. And so for that reason, I gave this book a 1 out of 5. So those are the 4 books that I read this month. I'm interested to know what you guys read over the course of December. Leave your favorite books in your descriptions and what you thought about them in the comments below, because I want to, maybe get some inspiration for some other books to check out and read. So that was it. It's my final reading wrap up for 2020. Coming soon, hopefully, I'm going to be having a sort of reading goals challenge video for 2021. I'll discuss what I'm trying to do for the next year with my reading. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And that's going to be it for this video, guys. So as always, I want to thank you for watching, and I will see you in another video coming up very, very soon.